We have reached the weird season portion of our team previews here on bet.nola.com, powered by the Dattitude Podcast. It is number 24 of 32, and it's the Minnesota Vikings who somehow, boys and girls, went 13-4 last season after going 8-9 the year before, taking the league by storm. How did they do it? Will they do it again, even though no one thinks they have a prayer in hell of doing it again? Does that mean we do? I don't know. Come along for the ride and find out. Most of what you need to know about the Minnesota Vikings is all here on this screen, including right down there. You see in his second season going now, it's Kevin O'Connell. He was in his first year last year. Kevin O'Connell was brought in to change the thinking of this franchise, who was definitely defensive-minded first under Mike Zimmer when they probably shouldn't have been. But did they take that to an extreme? Because the other things you need to know are, whoops, it's that way. It's that way. You see that offensive ranking? Well, that's great. They moved up to 7th overall. 6th in passing, although just 27th in rushing, despite having Dalvin Cook. But look at the defense. 31st overall in defense. 31st. Goes to show you how different today's NFL is today, by the way, than it was just even 10 years ago. Pretty much whatever your passing rank is, that's going to be close to what your overall rank is, because no one wants to run the ball anymore. Hence, running backs are underpaid and undervalued these days. But I digress a little bit. That's what we do on these shows. But those are the numbers you need to know, because everything else is weird. So they started off 8-1 last year. It's about as fluky of an 8-1 start as anyone could possibly get. Why? Because after beating Green Bay soundly in the first game, they were thumped by the Philadelphia Eagles in game number 2. And don't let that 24-7 score fool you. It was way worse than that. Then they went on to win 7 in a row. All of them close games. And that's one thing that the Vikings were able to do last year that really no NFL team in history has been able to do, kind of like they did last year. Win all those close games. Of their 13 victories, 11 of them were by a touchdown or fewer. Look, this Vikings team is, again, offensively dynamic. Kirk Cousins threw for 4,547 yards. Second in team history to Dante Culpepper. Justin Jefferson finished 5th in the MVP voting. 128 catches for 1,809 yards. Will Justin Jefferson be able to do anything similar to that again? You're asking a whole lot, because when you're trying to predict this season and you're trying to look ahead and do a preview and not a look back, because really, with the Vikings, you're looking back and looking ahead, because you're really hoping, at least in the offensive side of the ball, that this can be the same kind of team. Kirk Cousins is getting to that age now. He's 35 years old. He just turned 35. Is this when quarterbacks start to plummet just a little bit? Well, some of the great ones didn't. You just don't know. But Kirk Cousins has gone up the last 3 years. He's had 3 straight years with more than 4,000 passing yards. Will he be able to do it again? Well, it sure helps when you got a Justin Jefferson with you. And you know what? The rest of this receiving core isn't bad. But that leads me to a question, a huge question. When you have a defense that played like this defense did last year, and great, you went out and signed a couple guys that are going to help you. Cornerback Byron Murphy from Arizona. You give him 2 years, $17.5 million. The big signing on defense, obviously, Marcus Davenport coming over from the Saints, signs a 1-year, $13 million deal. But really, my biggest question was, going into the draft, you didn't have a second-round pick. You got a first-round pick, and then you don't pick again until number 102 overall. Got to be defense, right? This team is 7th in offense, 31st in defense. Got to pick a defensive player. No. Don't get me wrong. I think Jordan Addison is a fantastic receiver, is going to be a big addition to this Vikings team. But you're telling me that when you have all the defensive needs that you have, you're going to pick wide receiver Jordan Addison from USC with your number 1 pick? Don't get it. Don't get this team. You can't just solve your problems by bringing in a great defensive mind at DC, and that's what they did. Look, Brian Flores, this team is going to get better. I mean, first of all, it's hard to be worse than 31st, but you respect Brian Flores that much to know that this defense is going to go up 5, 6, 7 notches just because of his presence. I just don't know that they've done enough in free agency. And look, I got some flack back yesterday from my Detroit pick and saying how I didn't think they were going to be all that much better defensively. I'm not sure Minnesota's going to be that much better defensively. I know the Lions signed some free agents, and I know the Vikings have signed a few free agents, but I just don't know that they've addressed their needs quite enough. We're going to find out soon enough. Let's get to the schedule. And, you see something that you haven't seen with the other 3 NFC North teams when you look at their schedule. Immediately. Jumps right at you. What is it? And I'm not talking about the 13-4 record. I'm talking about 4th toughest schedule. Unlike any other team in this division, again, I'm not going to get to their prediction just yet, but if anything's going to hold them down, it's that 4th toughest schedule. That's just tough to deal with, frankly. It just is for any team. And look, it starts easy enough with Tampa Bay. They better win that Tampa Bay game because they play Philadelphia on the road on a Thursday night in week number 2, and it doesn't necessarily get easier. The only good thing I will say before I go through and dissect the schedule is I don't think there are any super long patches where it's super tough. They get their tough games and like quick hits and get them over with. Such is the case with Philadelphia. Then they play the Chargers. But then they get a break at Carolina. Then they play a tough one. Kansas City at home. At Chicago. And so you can see how this is going. I don't like that their bye week, and I've talked about this. Whenever your bye week is either at the bottom of the 2nd column or at the top of the 3rd column, it's tough. Play San Francisco at Green Bay. I think that little stretch right there, when you go from October 8th, the month of October is going to tell us a whole lot about these Vikings. You go from October 8th, Kansas City at Chicago, San Francisco at Green Bay. Going to tell us a whole bunch before it easing up a little bit at Atlanta, home for New Orleans, at Denver and Chicago. And really, when you look at the way it finishes, 2 of your final 3 games against the Detroit Lions, whom a lot of people think, obviously, if you've watched the previous previews, I don't necessarily think, but a lot of people think Detroit's going to be the next NFC North champion. And if Minnesota wants to make sure it holds on to that top spot, they're going to have to beat Detroit. Maybe have to beat them both times. We'll see. They play them December 24th and January 7th. Well, let's wait no more for the drum roll because this is about the time when we get there. Drum roll, please. 9-8. I told you yesterday I thought Green Bay was going to win this division. It would not surprise me at all if the Vikings were able to hold on to their spot. I think this is going to be a weird division. Everyone's thinking the NFC South is going to be the one where 9-8 is good enough, or even maybe 8-9 again like it was last year to win the division. I mean, spoiler alert, I don't necessarily think that for the NFC South. I think it could be the NFC North. I think 9-8 might be good enough to win this division, depending on what Green Bay does. Although I tell you what I thought, we'll see. I don't really have a best bet for this Vikings team. I certainly am not running to the window to bet the over 8.5. I put that on here because if you want to bet something, I certainly wouldn't bet the under. It's -110 either way. You take it or leave it, whatever you want. I'm leaving it. I'm not betting that. That's about the best I can do. I think they're going to be closer to the team that went 8-9 in 2021 than the one that went 13-4 last year with that schedule. Let's move on to the AFC North. That's what we'll do tomorrow. 2 teams tomorrow, 2 teams Friday, and then we move on to the NFC South next week. Thanks for staying with us this long. We'll see you tomorrow.